Hello there, it's Paul here and welcome along everyone. I have literally just finished doing my last project, which was the open segmented bowl. So I'm now thinking of my next project. We're mid-January at the moment while I'm recording this. For us in the UK, Mother's Day is towards the end of March, and my mother also has her birthday at the end of February. And I'd like to stay on the open segmented lines. Thoroughly enjoyed doing the last project. It does require a lot of work. Very little turning, but more planning than anything. So this time what I've decided to do, I would like to do some form of a vase, whether it be a bud vase or just an ordinary vase, but at the same time I want to personalise it. So I've literally just drawn up, I don't know how well it shows on the camera there, mum spelled out in sort of blocks, and I'm thinking that I would like this to be an open segmented ring in the middle of the piece. Now I may well also do it so that this repeats on both sides. So to do this in the best way, I don't want it too big. So I'm looking really at a ring of around about 100 millimeters, which is around about 4 inches, just under. And to fit those in, I now need to go to 36 segments per ring. And at the same time, I also want these as small as possible. So I've done some calculations on my spreadsheet, and I've basically worked out that if I do an open segmented ring of 36 pieces, if I use pieces that are cut at 6.2 millimeters, which is pretty precise, but I seem to have got the accuracy there now, and I will also try and cut them at a similar sort of thickness as well, maybe slightly thicker because they will get sanded down. I will then end up with a ring size of around about 101 millimeters, which is ideal. Now I don't want to just produce the segmented ring, the open segmented ring on its own. I want this to, let's say, fit into an overall project. This project is going to concentrate on creating that insert ring. So the best way I've thought of here is to actually have an ordinary segmented ring on the lathe first of all, then build up all my open segments and then cap it off with a closed segment ring as well. That way I will have an item that I can take off the lathe and physically glue onto another project. Now from my last project I've still got a couple of lengths of these that I put together, and I think I should have enough here to do the 2 segmented rings. So I've worked out if I do a closed segmented ring with these, I will need pieces cut at around about 10 millimeters length. And just checking, if I go down to 9 millimeters, I should still end up with a ring of around 102 millimeters. For the actual lettering, I'm probably going to try this with Purple Heart, and then for the rest of the blank part of the project, I will probably do that all in oak. Because each of the letter elements are going to be 6 millimeters high, I really don't want a very big spacer between them. So I will see at the same time if I can actually slice off some oak on the table saw, so at least they will sit between what will be the lettering, and hopefully then that way the whole ring shouldn't get too thick. So I've cut one set of pieces here with a few spares. I'm certainly not going to have enough to do 2 rings out of this, what I've got, so I'm going to have to probably make up some more or do something totally different. The problem with these is they're so small and light. I've got probably at least 2 or 3 flown across the workshop somewhere, and I think a couple of these got sucked down the gap by the saw blade, so they're in my vac. So I'm now going to sand these all up and then try and get them all glued together. Now the segmented ring I was making is now finished. I have a nice flat bottom and a flat surface to put the segmented pieces on. I've hot glued this to a waste block, so it's going to be easy to take off when I've finished and clean up, and I'm still going to have a nice surface to finish with. For the actual pieces, they've got to come out at this distance if I make them 6.2mm wide. Now the gap between the pieces on a 6.2mm wide piece is going to be less than 3mm, so that's thinner than the thickness of my board, so I would have to put the last piece on manually without the use of the board. For the actual pieces, I've been off and machined up some wood. For what will go as really the spacers, I've got this oak, which is around about 2.4mm thick, and it's not been sanded or anything, so this will become slightly thinner as it gets sanded down each time. So I'm hoping that's going to be down to about 2mm, if not less. For the actual segmented pieces, again I have some more oak. These are currently at about 6.4mm, so again when they're on here and been sanded down, we're going to probably lose that 0.2mm. But the main thing is that I want to end up with square pieces on the edge, so these now need to be cut on the table saw at 6.2mm wide, and I believe the angle is something like about 3.5 degrees because there's 36 segments to go on here. To do the wording, I have done some Purple Heart as well, again machined up the same size, 6.4mm, and the depth on these are all at around about 15mm, so when they go on there they're going to have plenty of depth to build them up and eventually turn them down. Even with these at 2.5mm, I think they're going to make a nice pattern on there, and you're going to be able to see really the layout of the wording quite nice and easily. So far I have cut all these very thin pieces. Now the problem I've had here is that with them being so thin, they split. They are extremely lightweight, so they just fly off everywhere, and I dare say that I'm going to find bits around my workshop here in months to come from these. Now I think I've got about 220 pieces there so far, and I don't think I've got enough. The thicker bits on the oak, I've cut a few there. I've still got a couple more lengths to do. I haven't even done any of the Purple Heart yet. Now I don't know if you can actually see my table saw there. Because of the weight of these pieces, they are flying everywhere, and I've literally put boards around so that hopefully it reduces the amount I've got that I'm losing. All the holes I've also taped up with masking tape, just to stop the pieces from falling through, and I still think I've probably lost about a dozen pieces down in front of the blade, and I've taped up the hole as best as I can. Now I've spent quite a few hours cutting up all these miniature pieces, and these little flat ones, they are around about 2mm thick. Every one of these pieces across the face on the end here should by rights be 6.2mm. Obviously there's going to be some discrepancies because with the pieces being so small you get little chip outs on the corners with the saw. I believe I have around about just over 220, maybe 230 of these pieces. I've already thrown some of them away, and I will probably still throw some more away because some of these may be a little bit too thin or just not suitable to use. Now these larger pieces, the oak ones, I believe I've got over 150 of these, and the Purple Heart, I think I've got about 60 of these, which is more than enough for what I need. Now I don't know how well that will show on the camera there, but hopefully you can see we've got a nice square face, which is what I was aiming for. Now I've got to say, this is extremely fiddly. These pieces are really small at 6mm wide, And you don't know whether you see there, the very last piece I had to take my table away because these gaps are less than the thickness of my platform here. And I also had to take a couple of these off, one because one of the pieces was just too short. I'd rather try and put all even pieces on, and there was also at least one piece where the gaps were bigger one side than the other. So I'm going to let this set for about 15 minutes, and then I shall chalk this all up and sand down, and after that I can then start putting on the thicker pieces with the mixture of the oak and the Purple Heart, and hopefully they will be a little bit easier to put on. That's now the first two open segmented rows glued onto the closed segment ring, and I've got to say these pieces are a lot easier to put on than the thin ones. Originally my plan was to properly spell out mum on one half and then repeat it on the other half, but when I sat down and looked at the plans properly, when I first laid this out, I don't know whether it will show on there, this is where I was planning around to start with, and my measurement for all the segmented pieces. When I sat down and worked it properly, I realised that you was going to spell mum and you was going to have a gap of one blank piece each side before you spell out mum again, and it just looked too cluttered. So last night when I finished that first open segmented row, I just stood at the other bench and I drew out another plan here, and again, I don't know whether it shows on there, got the mum bit in the middle there, worked out the gaps I've got on the side here, and I was playing around with these no end to come up with some form of a pattern. I ended up coming up with this, and then today at work went on SketchUp, built all this up again. It's a nice quick and easy job to do on SketchUp when all the pieces are the same size, same diameter. You can quickly copy all the rings up and just fill in the pieces. And what I've come up with there, I don't know whether it will show on here, my phone is almost dead. Now I don't know whether you can actually see that. That's the first M, round to the U, then the M, and then I've got sort of like a double stroke pattern on the first part, a little piece on the bottom to fill it out with, and then the double stroke pattern the opposite side. So this is now the middle row put on, so I've got two more rows of these thick pieces to go on, and hopefully you can start seeing here where the lettering is going to spell out. So we've got the M there, got the U and another M, and then this side is going to be the patterns. Now I did a couple of things, I don't know if you've actually noticed, I've been using my large sanding board on this. And the only reason for that is because it's got newer sandpaper on it. The other thing on my stand here, you'll have probably noticed that I just sand this off every time. And that's really because the glue is building up on here a little bit where it's just catching. So it just means I've got a clean surface every time. And the third thing is I've been using my pencil that I made, and it's just easy to guide the pieces in on this and move them slightly so that I can make sure that they're properly lined up before I then just hold them down for the 10 seconds and move on. I'm not going to do any turning on this until I've got all the layers up on here, and then it will just be really to true the whole thing up inside and out. So that's now all the open segmented rings on, and I've just flattened off the surface to put another closed segment ring on. And I mean, hopefully you can see this okay, all the lettering on there, and then the pattern that I've just done around the back. So my next job is to go off and see if I can now go and make another one of these. So I need to cut down some thin strips of sapele and a bit of oak, glue them all together, and cut out the 36 segments as before, and then glue that all together to make the ring. Once I've got it glued on there, I can then turn down the outside to true it all up, turn down the inside to true that up as well, and that will be it for this project video. Now I've been off and made another closed segment ring here, and I've flattened this surface off just using my sanding board. So I'm now going to glue this on here, and that can then be left for about an hour at the most before I can then come back and start turning all this down. And once I've got this in place, I will just stick a weight on there, bring up the tailstock just to give it a little bit of pressure. Again, I shouldn't need too much glue on this. Alright, that shouldn't need too much pressure on there. I'll just leave that now for probably about half an hour, maybe an hour. So this has now been set on here for probably about 30-40 minutes, and it should be on there fine now. And I'm just going to use my Ashley Isles 9mm spindle gouge, mainly because it's got such an acute angle on it. It's a lot easier to go down on the inside here. I'm just looking to true all of this up now on the inside, and then I'll do the same on the outside. And I'm just taking light cuts here as I go down. Just don't want to be too vicious for this all to fly apart. Right, that's the inside trued up. Right, so the inside is all trued up now. I did have to take a reasonable amount out of there because one or two of these pieces were actually quite short on the inside. So I'm now going to true up this outside. Going to use my Ashley Isles 12mm spindle gouge, and then I can then just finish off this top. Flatten this top bit off a bit, and then take my sanding board tool. I will just hit this glue with my thin parting tool so it just heats up the glue a bit, and then it should pull straight off. and that's now going to be easy to clean up. Now this is another one of those projects which has took me a week to complete, and I think you'll probably understand that in the way of figures, in that if you was to dissolve all the glue on this piece, you would end up with 612 pieces of wood on there. So as you can quite imagine, it took quite a bit of time cutting the pieces, sanding them down, preparing them all ready to be glued up. The actual gluing them together on the segmented ring and the sanding on the top was so minimal. Turning wise, I mean, all I've done here is just I wanted to true up the inside so it was a nice centre, true up the outside, so I have a finished item ready to go on to another project. And I think I probably spent about 5 to 10 minutes doing the turning. Now the other thing, I don't know whether you can actually see it too well, if you look at these laminated rings on the bottom here, you'll see that they're not fully in line with each other. And that's a bit of a problem I've got at the moment, in that it's hard for me to cut very fine strips which are totally parallel with each other. If you looked at my last open segmented project, the large bowl, where I put these in as well, it doesn't notice on there because they're all separated, they're all as open segments like this. But this one I did actually want to put in a closed segment ring on the top and bottom, so that I have one very secure piece to somehow mount into another project. And I'll turn this slowly, hopefully you can see this okay. So you've got your M there, your U and the M again, and for the back it's just like a mirrored pattern on there. Now because this is going to be part of another project, that's why I've not sanded it, not put any finish on it or anything like that. So I think the real eye-opener on this will be when I put some form of a liquid on it. It'll end up probably being a spray lacquer again, which is then when this will probably all come alive. So it's been quite a learning process doing this one, especially with these small pieces, and they has been really fiddly. And I found in the end the easiest way was to, if I could rest them on my table before they got pushed in, and then just use the end of my clutch pencil here just to push them in place. So yeah, it's been extremely fiddly doing these. The little squares themselves wasn't so bad because you'd actually got something you could hold on to, but the ones that are in there, which are about 2mm thick, they were extremely fiddly to deal with. Next thing I've got to do, I've got to go off, try and do some plans on what I'm going to do with this. I'm looking at some form of a vase, whether it be that this is the centre band of the vase where it just comes down like that, or even towards the top of the band, and it comes like that, just an ordinary vase shape, or whether I have this in the bottom half in some form of a bulbous shape. I don't know yet, but I think because the lettering on these, you don't want to distort them too much, so this will probably remain flat like that. I would probably highly unlikely do a curve on there. Any curves will come on the pieces on the above or below. So hopefully that will be my next project video up with what I do with this. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you on the next project video.